Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Fantasy for the Ages, the show where a father and son get together and talk about fantasy, science fiction, and other nerdy things that we enjoy. Today, welcome to the show. Glad to have you with me because I don't have Zach with me. This is one of those weekends he's not available, so I'm putting out one of our long form content all on my lonesome. But thanks to your presence, I don't feel lonely. And in fact, thanks to a lot of presence out there, we're feeling less and less lonely. We're feeling heard. Thank you to all of you who are recent YouTube subscribers. We've had quite an uptick in the numbers lately, and we promise to keep trying to deliver on the content that you've come for and that you're enjoying. So if you enjoy this one, the feedback continues to be helpful. Go ahead and like it down below. And if you haven't subscribed yet, if this is the one you've stumbled on, this is a great time to do it. So click the subscribe. Leave your comments in the comment box down below. We always respond to those. Love hearing from you. And speaking of hearing from you, in the show notes, you can find out all the ways to connect with Zach and I, social media, our Discord server, email, and even becoming one of our Patreon supporters and helping this content keep coming out. Thank you to all of you who already are supporting us on Patreon. So, in our longer form contents, we like to talk about what we're drinking because we think when we're drinking, we make better content. Still to be determined whether that's true or not. But this is just a simple kind of drinking here today because I'm staying off alcohol for a little while. I'm getting old. Medical reasons. Sometimes you gotta abstain. Never bugged me in my 20s. But, anyways, I've got a simple Diet Coke today. It'll wet the palate. And I'll be fine. Except when I swallow ice when I'm trying to do it. All right, what have I got for you today in this episode? Well, I've been thinking, we're in December now of 2023, and I'm thinking of all the wonderful books that I've experienced this year. I think I'm at 133 books and counting. And it's been a great ride. And I don't even do audiobooks on high speed. I've just found a lot of time to read. I do audiobooks, I do books on Kindle, and I even do some hardcover and soft paperback, physical forms. I don't read those very fast. That's not my preference anymore. But it does allow me to get through a lot of content over the course of the year. This is my number one hobby. Well, when I say this, that's probably making these episodes. Reading is maybe my number two hobby so that I can do this one. But anyways, thinking on all the books that I read this year, there are quite a few that are the first time I'd ever read something by particular authors. I decided to list them here for you, which are the best authors that I found for the very first time. Some of them I'd heard of before, but now I've read their books. Others I discovered completely this year. I looked at all of the authors that I read for the very first time. There's 12 of them. And they're all worthy of mentioning. So I'm not leaving off any of the authors I found for the first time. I am ranking them, however. I have a definite preference on who is the best, who is the least best. I don't have any worst ones, okay? I found good stuff, but I am definitely able to order them for you. If you haven't read any of these authors, I'd encourage you to find their books. Check them out. Some of them only have one book so far. Support these authors. See what they have, what they're putting out there. And when you read and comment, maybe even review, if you're one of these content creators like me, it helps encourage them so much, and we may get more great content. So who do I have? Let's start at my number 12. I'm bringing to you Christopher Buehlman. And apologies if I mangle any of the pronunciations, because I haven't listened to audiobook on all of these, so I may not say their names right. Christopher Buehlman is the author of The Black Tongue Thief. This is the debut book of the Black Tongue series. It's down on the bottom because even while I was reading it, I didn't particularly connect with the characters. The story is decent. The world building's pretty good. But In this fantasy story, I just wasn't finding that I liked the people very much. And I don't think that was all by design. Just the way Buellman created these characters, they didn't click for my preference. And honestly, even though the story is pretty good, I didn't enjoy it as much as I was hoping I would, especially based on the hype I heard from others, which is why I read it. Some people who just thought this was amazing, and I'm like, it's good. Not amazing, but it's good. Will there be more? That's always the question when a debut novel comes out in a series no one's ever heard of. Looking online, I do find that a prequel novel is scheduled to come out next year, 2024, at some point. There's nothing else advancing the series yet that I can see. I may check out the prequel book, but I'm not sure. I've got so many other good things waiting to be read that this one may not have been quite good enough for me to, put it at the top of the list and get to it. But I could see myself reading more eventually. Christopher Buellman is, putting out something that is entertaining fantasy. And if you like fantasy, it might be worth checking this book out. Let's move on to number 11. Fantasy is my thing. So is science fiction. So is horror. This next author kind of fits in a mix of some of these, and that's Jacqueline Druga. I really say what she writes is in my wheelhouse. Apocalyptic fantastical tales. How many ways can society as we know it come to a screeching halt? I have a bunch of her works on my TBR, and all these feature different types of scenarios where apocalypse, man. This year, I read the first book of hers, 1037, which is a time, and then the Rise trilogy. They both were very different types of stories, not at all related. 1037 is a standalone novel. Rise is obviously a trilogy. I consider Druga's writing of these books, I mean, there's stories that I found interesting and again, apocalyptic. I like this kind of stuff, but the writing's just kind of standard. It's not excellent. It is definitely fan serving though. If you enjoy this sort of subgenre of fantasy, horror, sci-fi blend, you're going to enjoy these books. They are easy to consume. They're kind of like Pringles. It's hard to stop with just one. So 1037 was entertaining. I move on to the Rise trilogy. I had no problem reading all three of them, but I'm not left pondering amazing themes or wow, that prose was incredible. No, no, no. She's just churning books out, it feels like, I think, but they're still entertaining. They don't challenge me as a reader, but they do feed my interest in apocalyptic literature. So, Jacqueline Druga, I've got a bunch more of hers on my list, scattered throughout, and I look forward to getting to them. Number 10, John O'Brien. John is the author of the 10-book series A New World, and he gave me some fun zombie-like reading that I enjoyed this year with that series. Part of the fun of A New World is that much of this takes place here in the Pacific Northwest where I live. It focuses on locations that I know very well, that I drive past often, and that just upped the entertainment value. Now, O'Brien has created a new sort of zombie apocalypse here, coming up with a creation called Night Runners. They're not really zombies, but the threat is zombie-esque, and it certainly comes about in a very familiar manner for those of us who are into the zombie subgenre. These Night Runners, though, man, they bring a new level of terror and danger to the genre, really well crafted by O'Brien. I also valued the author's approach in designing this series with his focus on the main character, Jack Walker. Jack is a retired Air Force serviceman and did some time in special forces as well. That kind of character often plays well in zombie apocalyptic literature. But this dude he's out of the military when this all breaks out, and he is driven by a prime directive to protect his family above all. When the poop hits the swirling thing, he's not with his family. So, objective one, he's got to get to his family. His family is his kids, and then his girlfriend slash fiance, because he's divorced. So his kids are with his ex-wife. And he's got to figure out how to bring these people to him. And that drives a lot of the early plot of the story. I enjoyed this family dynamic driving a lot of the action. I also enjoyed the fact that Jack's family members here are not a bunch of helpless idiots. Rather, they are teens and then this girlfriend who are all fully capable of saddling up and helping him take on the challenges. They are, I mean, he's Jack Walker, he's the lead, but they are strong supporting roles for him. The whole 10-book series was a pulse pounder of a story, and I churned right through it. It was good, entertaining fun for me. I also then read O'Brien's 8-book collaboration with author Mark Tufo called A Shrouded World. That was weird. Not nearly as good as this, A New World, but it was still nice to get more of O'Brien's content. I'm putting out a different episode just talking about A Shrouded World soon. Let's move on to number 9. My 9th favorite, best author that I discovered this year is a friend, Eric Hahn. Eric published his debut novel this year, Jake the Dragon Talker, book 1 of the Drakenard Chronicles. I should ask if I'm saying that right. Eric, you have to tell me, am I saying that right? Drakenard, 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 Draknarde? I know it's not that. Anyways, this book, delightful fantasy read. It's targeted to young readers. I'm not its age demographic. Picture readers maybe age 10 to 12, certainly going a little younger, a little older than that, depending on reading level of the individual and their interest in a fun classic fantasy novel. It makes this list, Eric makes this list for multiple reasons. First, he has set the foundation for multiple books with this first successful novel. Second, he's done some nice world building here. I appreciate what he's crafted. And he's filled it with interesting and engaging characters that you do like spending time with and wanting to know what's going to happen next to them. Third, he's a friend and he's done something I toyed with for years. He's actually pulled off writing a book and getting it out there, published, available. You can buy it now on Amazon in ebook or hardcover, paperback. I don't know, maybe it's not hardcover. I didn't look at that. I read it electronically, but it's available. And I can't say I've done that. So it's cool to have a friend who's an author. And so, that's just another reason he's on the list. People are literally buying his book. I know that's got to feel good for him, and I'm proud of him. Keep it up, Eric. But finally, the last reason he's on the list is I got to read an advanced copy of this book. It was delightful. I hope to see many more publications in the Drakenard series, the Drakenard Chronicles. We got to know more about what's going to happen to Jake the Dragon Talker. All right, number 8 on my list this year, Joseph Zombie Zuko. Zuko is an author who lives literally about 15 minutes from my house. And the entire 8-book The Infected series that I read this year happens practically in my backyard. I enjoyed this brutal and gory zombie apocalypse tale. I've got content on it if you want to know a lot more about it. It's really just one big story published in 8 digestible chunks. Ooh, digestible chunks and zombies is probably not good together. Zuko goes all in this series with vivid kills, graphic danger, stuff that likely really would happen if there was a traditional zombie apocalypse in a place like the greater Portland, Oregon metro region. Any dense urban area suddenly infested with zombies going viral and rabid, it's not going to be good. But I also appreciated how Zuko gives us a nice balance in this story between the dangers coming from the zombies and the dangers coming from the human idiots, as well as the selfish evildoers that are out there amongst the living. There's danger from many different sources. Zuko does not hold back on what happens, especially even to his protagonists in this series. You can cheer for them, but in no way would you want to be them. It sucks in the middle of a zombie apocalypse. You get that pretty clear. I blazed through these 8 books. They are not the pinnacle of writing. There's nothing wrong with them, but it's not about the writing. It's about the story. And they are simply satisfying to read if you are a fan of the zombie apocalypse genre. Number 7, Thomas Howard Riley. It's a bit of a miracle that this author comes in all the way up at number 7 on my list, as initially, I really did not like his book. Riley is the author of We Break Immortals, book 1 of the Advent Lumina cycle, published at the end of 2021. So right now, it's basically 2 years old, and it currently remains the only book in this series. It's not a short book. This thing's a chunker. I was encouraged to read it by my friend Spencer over at the Fantasy Files. He loved it, and so I did. It was already on my TBR, but I moved it up a little higher because Spencer said, "This is great." Well, the first 15% of the book, I almost DNF'd it. I found Riley's approach to character development to be lacking in my subjective fan judgment. Even a little juvenile what he was doing with some of the characters. And I spoke out about that on social media that I seriously was thinking of stopping reading this book. I just was not enjoying the story. Thankfully, my tendency towards being a compulsive completionist would not let me DNF it, and I ended up being really glad I kept going. Riley's strength in this book is the world building and the magic system that he's developed as part of all of this. The characters, I'm still not a big fan, but the story itself develops into something pretty fantastic. And the finale is freaking amazing. This definitely falls into the realm of grimdark fantasy, both for the brutality of the kills and literally the sheer number of people who are destroyed over the course of this story. No one has plot armor in this book. No one who does die gets to do it quietly off screen. No, there's multiple battle or fight scenes, and they're all loud, big, graphic, mostly due to the nature of the magic in use, which again is one of the things Riley was really good at how he created something that's his unique niche in this style of fantasy now. So, in the end, I enjoyed reading this book, and I do look forward to the sequel whenever it may come. Okay, halfway done. Let's talk about my 6th best author that I discovered this year, and that would be Blake Crouch. I was introduced to Blake Crouch's work again by Spencer over at the Fantasy Files podcast, as he'd read the first book in Crouch's Wayward Pines trilogy, and he was raving over it on social media. So I was like, well, okay, I should check this out. And I got sucked right in. Wayward Pines is a science fiction series with a touch of criminal mystery. And it balances those two facets pretty well through most of the trilogy. Though the way it does that, the way it balances those, changes significantly as you move further into the trilogy. I found the entire 3-book read great, and I moved through them pretty quickly. And then when I got done, and I was like, Spencer, let's do an episode. Let's talk about them. He was like, oh, I haven't read past the first book yet. And I'm like, how? As good as that first book was, how did you not keep going? Well, he just got busy reading other things. He wasn't opposed. So now that I wanted to do content, he went ahead and finished the other 2 books as well. So did his partner in crime on the show. And the 3 of us got together and we did an episode for my channel here. And you can find it where we talk all about Wayward Pines. It's full spoiler, so don't go into that one until you've read the trilogy, which you should. Oh, man, this was good because I so enjoyed it, was so entertained, engaged throughout the whole thing. I added more Blake Crouch to my TBR. He's solid. Now let's move to another author that I found this year and consider quite solid. Number 5 is Hugh Howey. Spencer does not get credit for this one. This time it's my son Zach who introduced me to an author I hadn't heard of yet. See, Hugh Howey is the author of the Silo trilogy, which I've now read this year, and didn't know it existed. I had heard there was a show on Apple TV Plus called Silo. Looked like it might be my kind of thing, but before I got around to watching it, Zach asks me, "So, have you heard of that show Silo on TV? And did you know it's based on a trilogy of books?" I went, "What?" So, okay, I'm thinking to watch it. Well, I hate watching something before reading the source material, so I immediately went to those books, added them right at the top of my TBR, and read right through them. We're talking about Wool, Shift, and Dust. And I have content in all three of these books elsewhere on the channel. They were excellent. I found the first and the third books best, but the second one, Shift, was necessary to round out the deeper appreciation and understanding of this trilogy. Now, once I completed Howie's books, which had no trouble, plowed through them, totally delightful. Then I moved on to watching that TV adaptation. Only season one is out. It's excellent. It's, as with most adaptations, it's not 100% faithful to the source material, and yet it feels very faithful in its themes, in its general feel, in the approach they're taking with characters. I like it, I approve, and I'm looking forward to season 2. Number 4, my fourth best author I discovered this year, started right off in January, and that would be John Palladino. John shows up high on this list as another of the self-published authors that I discovered, and I found his first book, The Trials of Ashmount, early in January. Loved it. It was one of the first books I read this year. I think in the Kindle format, it was literally the second book I read. Brandon Sanderson and a secret novel squeezed in first. Tress got some love. But then The Trials of Ashmount. And as I'm reading this book and I'm posting my experience on Twitter, I'm just praising the experience, the things I'm loving about this fantasy read. And well, John saw my posts and he engaged with me. We had some great back and forth discussion about his content that eventually led me to inviting him on for an author interview episode, the first ever that I'd done. It was great fun, and of course, that's a really good conversation you can now go back and look at on our channel. The Trials of Ashmount was published originally in mid-2022, so I found it when it had been out about half a year, and it was still picking up speed. And if you've never heard of it, well, I'll help it pick up some more speed. This is a book totally worth reading, particularly if you enjoy grimdark that doesn't necessarily get too dark. John kind of enjoys perhaps calling it grim hope. And I like that. It's fresh, it's fun, but it is still dark at times. Mostly when you think grim dark, fresh and fun, those don't go together. But the way John writes this story, it really does. You'll have to experience to understand what I'm saying. John's created a world, a magic system, a mysterious plot, and the most amazing characters that just all blend together in a wonderful way to give you a story that from front to back, you love reading and you don't want to put down. Now, The Trials of Ashmount is just book one of The Tragedy of Sedaine, a series he's working to produce. And I'm happy to note that book 2 of the series, Buzzard's Bowl, came out later this year. And so I read that too. In fact, John gave me the opportunity to read an advanced copy, and wow, I loved it. I put out a review on that right away. It is a very worthy sequel to The Trials of Ashmount. I'd say Buzzard's Bowl takes it up another notch. John Palladino is showing as he works on these books, he's also growing in skill and confidence as a storyteller. When I think of the journey from The Trials of Ashmount to Buzzard's Bowl, they're two very different books, even though it's really flowing one directly to the other. It makes me more and more excited for the future of this series and where he's going to take it. I really look forward to more coming out from John Palladino. Number 3, Patrick Rothfuss. This is the year I finally broke down and read this author who so many fantasy fans raved about. I had resisted reading the books of the King Killer Chronicle because it's two books of a trilogy, and it's been over 12 years with no third book. I'm like, no, no, I am not getting into one of these again where some author's never going to finish it. It's the George R. R. Martin syndrome. I don't want to do it. But people kept telling me, no, no, Jim, this stuff is so good. It won't matter if another book never comes out. You'll want to read this. And people finally wore me down. I said, fine, I'll try it. And they were right. These books are amazing. So this year I read book 1, The Name of the Wind, and then book 2, The Wise Man's Fear, back to back. And then I followed it up right away with the novella that's also available, The Slow Regard of Silent Things, which focuses just on one of the secondary, maybe even tertiary characters of the series. I deeply enjoyed all 3 of these reads, and I'm a huge fan now of Rothfuss's writing style, his storytelling skill, his world building, and honestly, his giftedness at creating amazing characters. Now, just this past week, I read the newest release in the series. Nope, nope, not book 3 of the trilogy, but a novella that has come out, The Narrow Path Between Desires. Now, this is a bigger, fully fleshed out version of a short story, The Lightning Tree, that had come out years ago in a short story collection. But I never read the original. I've only read this. It doesn't advance the King Killer Chronicles story, but it does give us more of the world, and particularly more understanding of one of the secondary characters, Bast. I'll have a book blast coming out soon on that one, if it isn't already out by the time you see this episode. It's delightful. And Patrick Rothfuss, number 3 on my list, because wow, dude is talented. Now, please give us the 3rd book. Okay, number 2. And yes, for my preference and style, coming in ahead of Patrick Rothfuss, I'm giving this to Gregory Contaxis. Greg gets this lofty position due to his exceptionally well-written and entertaining debut fantasy novel, The Return of the Knights, a fantasy tale serving as book 1 of the Dance of Light series. This is classic fantasy with many of the common fantasy tropes, but it's done so well that you don't care that it's full of tropes. It's a great story. It's delightful to read. Man, it was so pleasurable. And I loved how he skillfully creates a huge backstory to this world that you're dropped into and throws you into a mystery of trying to figure out what's going on. Who are these characters? What's coming down the pipe? Because you know there are things that are going to happen. You can see him laying things out, and you're just very intrigued and caught up in the way he writes this story. Contaxis followed up this first book by releasing this year a prequel novel, The Night of the Moon. And that was just as good as book 1. I love both of these books, and I eagerly await more to advance the series. Of note, the prequel, while listed in some places online as book 0.5, don't let that confuse you. You definitely would need to read book 1, The Return of the Knights, first. Then read the prequel. The prequel, it's a good story of its own, but you won't fully appreciate what you've got unless you've read The Return of the Knights first. So, great job, Greg. Keep those books coming. All right, number 1 on my list. And really, there was no contest. And if you've been following me on social media, you know who number 1 is. Mr. Steven Erikson. No others can stand to this one. This has been the year that I finally got into Malazan, Book of the Fallen, and my greatest question as I move through these books is, why did I wait so long? Erikson is masterful in the story he's written. I'm just through the first half of the 10 core novels of Malazan, Book of the Fallen, and I am loving these massive, deep, and complex books. They're making me think so hard, and it's just amazing. This is epic fantasy at its best. Next up, I'll be reading one of Ian Esselmont's entries into the Malazan universe. He's another author who writes books that kind of interweave into this big world. Stephen Erickson has also written additional parallel books and series that are part of the Malazan universe, but they complement the 10 core books. As I've looked at various reading lists and stuff, it's recommended you start putting some of these in as you work through the 10. First, read the first 5 books, and then you start interweaving a few. So that's what's coming up next. But in 2024, I should finish the core 10 books and quite a few of the corollary novels. Who knows, maybe all of them, but they're still being written. I think it's 26 all told right now. I don't care. I'm just eager to keep journeying through here and enjoying what essentially Stephen Erickson brought to be. Hands down, Erickson is one of the best epic fantasy authors out there, perhaps one of the best of all time, in my opinion. And he's completely deserving to be my number 1 slot. That's what I have for you today. I hope you found this enjoyable. If you haven't read some of these authors, again, I encourage you, go find their books. Check it out. Even Eric Hahn's book. I know it's for younger people, but it's fast, it's quick. See what he's created, and you may know some young person that would be a great book to gift to and spark a love for fantasy fiction like somebody must have done for you at once upon a time. That's where I'll leave you then for today. Thanks for watching, everyone. We'll talk to you next time.